The rain in Portland had been steady all evening, a soft cold mist tapping against my studio window. At 9:07 p.m., the space smelled faintly of pine from the mood board I'd been working on, a palette of deep evergreen and silver gray for a luxury craft brand. The LED desk lamp cast a sterile glow over my monitor, all efficiency, no warmth. I was in the middle of aligning a swatch when my phone lit up with an iMessage from my mother. Nam nai cha kong ju cho cho kon roi thuong kon. I read it slowly, my eyes landing on Kong Ju Cho as if the phrase had weight. My chest tightened. The cursor blinked on my screen while raindrops patterned the glass. I didn't type back. Instead, I stared at those 3 words and felt something slip inside me, a quiet, hollow drop. The room hummed with the fan's steady whirl, my mug of tea long gone cold. On the monitor, silver ripples swam through a background texture echoing the surface of Lake Crescent in summer. I told myself not to overreact, that maybe there really wasn't space this year. But the thought tasted like something I'd been fed too many times before. I clicked my laptop shut, let the room dim except for the desk lamp. In that half-light, I closed my eyes and saw another shore. I was 8 years old again, walking the weathered planks of the Lake Crescent dock beside my grandfather. The air was thick with the scent of wet pine. The water lapped at our ankles as he leaned down and said quietly, "If no one invites you to their table, build your own." His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as if this was knowledge too precious to be overheard. The grain of the wood beneath my sneakers seemed to map out a direction only I could follow. When the memory faded, I was back in my cramped Portland kitchen at 10:01. I filled the kettle, but my hands trembled, the lid clinking against the pot. Steam curled into the dim space, mingling with smaller memories, the National Design Award I'd won when my parents were too busy at a networking event, the Christmas when I got a $50 gift card while everyone else unwrapped personalized leather-bound journals, the family photo where I stood at the edge, the light missing my face entirely. I pressed my palms to the counter. I'd always told myself they had reasons, travel schedules, logistics, misunderstandings. But the truth was heavier now, pressing into my ribs. They simply didn't make room. At 10:18, I called Harper. I read the text aloud, word for word. "They're not short on space," she said after a beat. "They're short on respect." The truth of it sat between us. She reminded me of the creative retreat concept I'd sketched years ago and tucked away in a drawer. Back at my desk, 10:46. I muted the family group chat and shut off notifications. My mood board still glowed on the screen, evergreen and silver like pine against the lake. I snapped a photo of it, saving it to my phone, not for work, but as a private vow. Then an Instagram notification slid down, "Cyrus itinerary is out, biggest year yet." My thumb hovered, a cold hunch settling in my stomach. I tapped. And in that moment, something in me shifted from the excluded observer to someone ready to find out exactly what was going on. The post opened to a glossy shot of Lake Crescent Lodge with the caption "Annual Retreat. 118 confirmed." I zoomed in, letting my eyes trace the smaller text beneath "Overflow Lodging, Birch Cabin and Hemlock Cottage. 2 extra houses. So much for no room." I took a screenshot marking the key lines in bright red. My pulse thudded with the kind of heat that comes not from surprise but from being lied to when the truth is public. Flipping over to stories, I found Maribel's update, a video of a long table at a waterfront restaurant, 20 place settings gleaming under candlelight. So crowded this year, her caption read, tagged with the restaurant's account. White linen, silver forks, tall tapers, nothing like the mismatched mugs and mason jars of the old retreat dinners. If there was a menu tasting for 20, then this year's scale had been locked in months ago. The not enough room text wasn't a last-minute logistics issue, it was the cover story. At 11:19, my phone buzzed. "Gareth," I tried to speak up. "Dad says this year's about the image." That word image dug under my skin. I'd built a career in branding and crafting authentic image, and now I was being excluded to protect some curated facade that didn't have space for me. By 11:30, I was pacing. I almost posted the screenshots to my own feed, tagging the lodge, the restaurant, the family members. My finger hovered over share until Harper's voice cut through my impulse. "Don't burn a bridge. Build a house." I deleted the draft, opened a new browser tab, and typed Lake Crescent area lakefront estate availability. Scrolling past generic rentals, I stopped at a listing Silver Pines estate. Photos unfolded, glass walls facing the lake, a private dock, an open kitchen with long counters meant for shared meals. Available the exact week of the retreat. I ran the numbers. The rental price was steep, cancellation penalties worse. My down payment fund for a future home blinked in my mind like a warning. I sat back, breathing in slow, letting another memory surface, the hallway of Lake Crescent Lodge years ago, where my grandmother arranged wildflowers in a cloudy glass jar. Her version of elegance was kindness you could feel, welcoming hands, not polished silver. That was the kind of gathering I wanted to bring back on my own terms. At 11:52, I bookmarked the Silver Pines page, leaving it open beside my savings spreadsheet. The idea was dangerous, but it pulsed with possibility. Tomorrow, I would call my mentor. Tonight, I let the thought settle. I was done fighting for a seat at their table. It was time to build mine. The morning was still damp from an overnight drizzle when I stepped into Willow and Grind, my corner cafe in Portland. The clock read 7:42, and the air carried that familiar mix of fresh espresso and wet pavement. I slid into my usual seat by the window, laptop, open a spreadsheet already waiting for me. Numbers filled the cells. Silver Pines, rental fee, insurance, catering, workshop supplies, speaker travel, plus a 15% contingency column. My savings account balance sat in the top corner of the screen like a silent question. Is this worth it? I thought of my grandmother's hands arranging wildflowers in that cloudy jar on the lodge table. That image settled the matter. I closed my eyes for a second, breathed in the scent of the coffee, and began locking in the budget. At 8:15, I was on a video call with Professor Alaric Vaughn. His lined face appeared against a wall of bookshelves, the morning light catching the rims of his glasses. I explained the plan in detail, why I'd chosen Silver Pines, what I hoped the retreat would stand for. He leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Don't waste yourself on direct confrontation. Design a space where people leave better than they arrived." I wrote it down in bold across the top of my notebook: build, don't retaliate. By 9:02, I was staring at the confirm reservation button on the Silver Pines booking site. My cursor hovered for a heartbeat before I entered my card details, agreed to the cancellation penalty, and clicked. A second later, the confirmation email landed in my inbox. I starred it, printed it, and pinned it to the studio wall. There was no turning back now. From 10:30 until just after lunch, I was in a rhythm, naming the retreat Creative Horizons, sketching a horizon line where wood grain met lake ripple, building a palette of deep pine lake silver and a fire-lit amber accent. I set the typography in a clean grotesque for headers and a warm serif for captions. A private landing page followed, 3-line mission statement, proposed schedule, RSVP form. With each kerning adjustment, my breathing steadied. Here I was in control. At 1:15, I began the guest list. Harper, of course, as co-host. Troy, my nature photographer friend. Miranda, who could throw clay on a wheel and hold a room spellbound. David, who taught breathwork like it was an art form. 2 craft brand founders. A gallery curator. From my family, only Isolde, whose empathy was rare, and Gareth, who had quietly supported me before. No one was invited purely for status. On the studio wall, I taped a yes-no board, each name paired with a short note why they belonged at my table. Emails went out at 2:00 personal warm each, with the site password dietary form and a note to bring hiking boots. This space is for those who respect it, honor each other, and share honestly, I wrote at the close. At 2:37, Harper called. "What's your kitchen plan?" "Insurance rain plan," she asked, ticking off each potential failure point. I added them to the checklist. She suggested Lucian Hart, the private chef who'd run campfire feasts up the coast. Then at 3:12, an unfamiliar email subject line slid into my inbox: vendor conflict notice row event. The sender was a regional service company near the lake. The message was vague. Certain suppliers may have scheduling and policy conflicts. I starred it, filed it under handle later. I wouldn't let it derail the build. By 4:05, the first replies were coming in. Miranda promised to bring her portable kiln. Troy pitched a sunrise photography walk. Isolde wrote, "I'll be there. I miss our grandparents." I understand you. Then a private message from Gareth, I'll come for one day. My choice. My hand tightened on the phone. My eldest brother had never broken ranks with our parents before. At 10:40 that night, I wrote 3 lines on separate cards and taped them beside the confirmation email. Don't ask for a seat. Build the table. Don't retaliate. Create. Don't stand alone. Connect. The last thing I saw before bed was Maribel's new story, a sweeping shot of the Lake Crescent shoreline. Then just for a second, the carved wood sign of a lakeside restaurant. My branding-trained eye caught the logo of a supplier in the frame. I screenshotted it. Something told me this detail would matter later. The first Monday of Creative Horizons broke bright and clear sunlight slicing through the tall pines that ringed Silver Pines Estate. The lake below was a smooth sheet of silver blue. By mid-morning, the air inside the main room was fragrant with cedar and coffee. Guests milled between the open kitchen and the workshop tables, their chatter blending with the soft notes of an acoustic guitar. We had just wrapped a session on brand narrative when Harper slipped in from the deck, her expression taut. She leaned in close and murmured, "You need to see this." She handed me her phone. The post on the screen was from Brian, my other brother. Some people think renting an expensive house means they've made it. Hilarious. The photo beneath was the lake unmistakably crescent with the hashtag real value. The comments were worse, thinly veiled jabs from other relatives, each one meant to land in my lap. A faint vibration started in my chest, anger threaded with the ache of recognition. This wasn't about property or prestige. It was about drawing lines in the sand in public. I locked the screen and set the phone on the table. Not now, I told Harper, but the decision was already forming. I wouldn't let them set the tone for this week. Then the sound of an engine broke through the birdsong outside. A pair of headlights flashed through the trees as a silver SUV crunched up the gravel drive. Harper glanced toward the window. "It's Camden and Cyrus," she said, her voice low. The twin brothers stepped out, all matching sunglasses and calculated ease. Camden was first through the door gaze, sweeping the room like an appraisal. "We just wanted to see what's so special. It made our parents clear their schedule," Cyrus said, lips curling at the corners. I smiled without warmth. "You're welcome to look around." They did, murmuring to each other. "Nice," Camden said finally, "but it's not the lodge." His tone was light, but it landed like a dart. A few guests paused in their conversation, sensing the undercurrent. Harper moved to my side, speaking under her breath. I overheard them in the driveway. Sterling sent them to document everything here, photos, maybe video for some family meeting. It clicked. They weren't just curious drop-ins. They were on assignment. I turned back toward the big windows where the lake glimmered in the distance. If they were gathering material, they'd get something, but it would be on my terms. Lucian had the kitchen moving like a quiet orchestra, shallots softening in a pan. A stockpot murmuring on the back burner, the smell of lemon and thyme drifting through the open doors. I was chopping herbs when Celine appeared at the threshold, one hand braced on the frame, the other cradling something against her coat. "A minute, Cassian," she said, barely louder than the hum of the vent. We stepped onto the back porch. The greenhouse cast a soft honey glow over the flagstones, and the pines beyond held the last of the evening light. She watched the lake for a long breath before turning to me. "There's something you need to know," she said. "Your grandparents intended Lake Crescent Lodge for you, not for your parents." For a second, I only heard the shore, that hushed tap of water on rock. "That isn't what the will says." "Because Sterling persuaded them to change course at the last moment," she replied. "He told them you weren't steady enough to manage it. They never stopped loving you for what you are, but they were swayed. They kept the prior agreement anyway, tucked away. I kept a copy." She reached inside her coat and produced a thick envelope, worn soft at the corner's edges, smoothed by years of handling. Inside, parchment-colored pages bore the familiar signatures in a fountain pen blue I'd seen on old birthday notes: Robert Collins, Eleanor Collins. My name set plainly in the center of a sentence that placed the lodge in my hands. Heat climbed my neck and settled behind my eyes. This wasn't just about a building. It was about the quiet erasure of a path I was meant to walk. The porch boards felt unsteady under my feet, as if the lake had lifted to meet us. I didn't show you because I wanted you to build your own life before you shouldered theirs, Celine said. But what I've seen here, these people, this house, the way you've made room, I believe you're ready to carry both. I slid the papers back into the envelope, careful not to crease anything, and pressed the flap closed. If this comes out, I said, there won't be a way to pretend we're fine. Pretending hasn't kept you safe, she answered. It only kept you quiet. When I returned to the kitchen, Harper read everything on my face. We stepped into the pantry and I told her what Celine had shown me. She listened with her arms crossed, jaw set. This is going to shake the whole tree, she said. Not just your parents. Everyone in that dining room, friends, clients, will have to pick a version of who you are. If you share it, do it on your terms and with a plan. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Isolde. Be careful. Mom and Dad want a family meeting at Silver Pines to clear things up. They're on their way to you. Probably tomorrow. I'm sorry. I stared at the message, then at the envelope in my hand. It felt like a key and a live wire at once, access and ignition in the same package. I tucked it inside my office drawer and turned back to the service, putting on my host's face as guests drifted toward the table. Every glass I set down, every napkin I folded smooth, carried the quiet knowledge that nothing about this week would be small again. When the last dessert plate left the pass, I stepped outside alone. The lake lay silver and still under a lifting moon. The air smelled like wet bark and lemon zest. I pressed my palm to the railing and felt the grain bite back. I had asked for a seat. I had built a table. Now I was holding proof that the original room was meant for me all along, and that came with a cost I could already feel in my bones. There would be no more sidesteps. The next conversation would be straight through the center. By late afternoon the next day, the sky had bruised over wind, threading through the trees hard enough to rattle the glass. A text from my father arrived at 3:11. We need to meet in the main hall, family only, not part of your retreat. Word traveled faster than wind. Guests exchanged looks as a procession of familiar faces filed through the doors, my parents Camden and Cyrus Bryan already carrying a manila folder like a prop, others behind them in a tight cluster. There was no attempt at discretion. Their entrance was the point. We gathered in the main room. The long windows turned the lake into a dark sheet of metal. Sterling planted himself near the center, shoulders squared. Cassian, he began, we need to make clear in front of everyone here that you are not replacing the Lake Crescent tradition with this alternative. Some people have misunderstood what you're doing. Before I could answer, Camden cut in, hands spread as if he were soothing a client. And we should address why you've opened what should be family space to outsiders. A few guests shifted in their seats. Harper stepped to the back of the room where she could watch the door. I kept my voice even. Silver Pines is my lease, my liability, and the people here are invited because they respect this place. That includes you, I said, and it landed between us like a challenge. Brian stepped forward, the manila folder already open. Let's not pretend this is altruism, he said. You're using our last name to run a business week. We have invoices that say as much. He held up printed pages, catering estimates, rental equipment, quotes, a copy of my insurance binder, triumphant as if he'd found a smoking gun instead of the due diligence I'd built into the budget. I didn't reach for the papers. I recognized the service names on the headers, including one that matched Maribel's story from the lakeside restaurant. Somewhere behind Brian's posturing, I could smell the vendor email I'd flagged the day before. These show that I'm paying for other people to eat well and that I insured everyone under my roof, I said. If there's a crime in being prepared, I guess I'm guilty. A rustle moved through the guests, some amused, some appalled. My mother's mouth tightened. Then Isolde stepped forward, palms open. Dad, she said, last month you called the retreat silly pageantry and said you wished you could skip it. Now you're here complaining that Cassian's event threatens it. Which is it? Her voice was steady, bewildered, brave. The room cleaved. Some of my siblings lined up behind my parents without words, arms crossed in a mirror of Sterling's stance. Others, friends, collaborators, leaned toward Isolde as if empathy itself had a gravity. Camden glanced at Cyrus, then back to me. This isn't just about tone, he said. We've retained counsel to review the chain of title here. There's an ambiguity in the land records we believe might affect your right to host this kind of gathering." His delivery was smooth practiced, but his eyes flicked to my father for approval, and that small tell gave him away. There it was. Not only a complaint, but a move to pry open the ground under my feet. I took a breath and let the silence stretch until I owned it. "You don't like what this place stands for because it wasn't your idea," I said finally. "You don't like that people came here and felt more like family than they do at Lake Crescent. You're calling it exposure or commerce or a legal question, but we all know what this is about." The wind pushed hard at the windows. A glass trembled on a side table. Somewhere down the hall, a door thunked in its frame. My father's voice dropped. "We built a name that means something. You don't get to trade on it for your personal projects." I looked around at the faces: Harper's steady, Troy's alert, Miranda's kind, the founders who had trusted me with their brands, the curator who had given me my first showcase. "I'm not trading on anything," I said. "I'm building on the legacy that made me possible. If you think that's an offense, I can't help you understand." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind and the low creak of the beams. I could have ended it there, let them march out, satisfied they'd dropped their warning. Instead, I walked to the front of the room and set my hand on the back of a chair, feeling the wood's cool curve under my fingers. "You asked for a meeting," I said. "You got one. Here's mine. Tonight, I'll speak to everyone in this room, family and guests. I'll explain what this week is and what it isn't. And I'll show exactly what I've paid for and why. If you want to stay, stay. If you want to leave, leave. But we're not doing this in half statements and drive-by accusations." My mother looked at my father. Brian's folder drooped just enough to betray doubt. Camden and Cyrus exchanged a quick glance, calculating next moves. I didn't wait for their permission. I turned to Harper. "We'll need the main hall at 8, I said. She nodded and started moving, already in logistics mode. The guests, sensing an ending, rose in pockets and drifted toward the doors, voices low, the room loosening around the edges. When the last of my family stepped into the corridor, I felt the pressure drop like the instant after a storm breaks. I stood alone a moment longer, listening to the rafters settle. The envelope in my office drawer might change the terms of this fight. Or it might simply confirm what I already knew, that the only way forward was through. Either way, I wasn't letting this meeting end as a warning shot from someone else's playbook. The next chapter of this week and of my place in this family would be written here in my house, under my light, with my voice carrying to the back of the room. The rain had turned silver pines into a fortress of shadows. I sat in my office with Harper, the low hum of the old desk lamp filling the silence between us. Outside, the wind rattled the tall windows and the scent of damp cedar seeped in through the cracks. "We can't wait for them to make the next move," Harper said, her voice calm but edged. "We need to take the floor tonight, in front of everyone." I leaned back, letting the weight of the last 2 days press into me. "You mean make it public?" "Here," she nodded. "Not just to defend yourself, redefine the story. If you don't, they will." I texted Isolde under the desk, "Bring Selene tonight." And the envelope. My thumb hovered over the send button for a moment before I pressed it. As Harper drafted a short announcement to invite everyone to a casual gathering in the main hall, I stepped into the corridor to clear my head. That's when I caught Camden and Cyrus in the East Wing lounge, their phones pointed toward a stack of signed guest agreements. I strode in before they noticed me. Looking for something, Cyrus stiffened. Camden smirked, just making sure everything's transparent. Harper appeared at my side, her tone clipped. "Transparency doesn't come from stealing files." She shut the folder and slid it under her arm before walking out. Back in the office, a trusted guest, Eleanor Finch, a longtime collaborator, slipped in quietly. "Cassian." I overheard Sterling and Brian talking in the courtyard, she whispered. "They're planning to call the Crescent Herald tomorrow morning. If that story hits print, you won't get a chance to explain." That was it. The clock had stopped ticking in my head. The fight wasn't coming tomorrow, it was already here. By the time I walked to the main hall, the murmur of voices was already growing. In my jacket pocket, Selene's envelope felt like both a sword and a live grenade. Tonight, I wasn't going to wait for permission to speak. The hall smelled faintly of pine resin and warm bread from the kitchens. Every chair was filled guests in their weekend clothes, family members in crisp sweaters and forced smiles. I took the small stage near the fireplace, my voice steady. When I created this retreat, I wanted a place that didn't care about who you were born to or how many titles you could recite at a dinner table. I wanted a place for connection, real connection. There was polite applause from the guests, but the family row remained still. Brian's voice cut through. And what's the bill for those connections? Cassian. Should we tell them how much you're pocketing? I gestured toward him. By all means. He stepped up, unfolded his papers, and began reading the numbers. When he finished, I handed Harper a folder. She distributed copies to the guests in the front row records, showing every expense had been paid from my own account. Not a single profit line. The room shifted. I turned toward the double doors. Selene, would you join me? Her steps were slow but deliberate. She opened the thick envelope and pulled out the original agreement signed by my grandparents, naming me as the inheritor of Lake Crescent Lodge. A ripple went through the crowd. Some guests whispered, others stared openly at Sterling. Sterling's voice cracked the air. That paper is meaningless. The legal will replace it. Isolde moved forward from the side wall. Then you'll want to explain this. She held up a printed email from the family attorney confirming no formal revocation had ever been filed. The quiet in the room deepened into something sharper. Camden stood abruptly, his voice tight. We just wanted to make sure Cassian didn't waste the family's assets like he did before. The words hung in the air heavier than the rain outside. Guests turned to me, curious, confused. My stomach tightened. The before Camden referred to was a wound I had never let the public see, a project I'd poured myself into, sabotaged from the inside by people I once trusted. Questions began flying from the floor. Camden's face paled. Sterling's jaw clenched. I stood there, the firelight flickering against Celine's document in my hands, realizing the room was no longer neutral ground. This was a battlefield, and every word from here on out would decide who walked away with the truth. Chaos ricocheted around the hall, raised voices, chairs scraping, a cluster of guests trying to decide whether to leave or stay. I took the mic and let the feedback ring for a heartbeat. Enough, I said, and the room began to settle. Harper moved to the double doors, closed them, and stood there with her arms folded, a quiet signal that we weren't going to be interrupted by phone calls or quick exits. Rain thickened against the windows. Thunder rolled over the lake like a slow drum. I'm going to walk through this in order, I said. No spin, no interruptions. Family and guests deserve the same clarity. I started at the beginning, my grandparents buying Lake Crescent Lodge when they were young and broke building summers around potluck meals and late-night stories. I talked about how the retreat had once meant we chopped vegetables together instead of curating seating charts, how we carried kayaks to the shoreline instead of photo backdrops to the lawn. I described the year I underwrote half the cost of repairs after a winter storm, how I designed the last printed invitations before those were replaced with corporate-looking Evites, how I donated my time to build the family site that got quietly rebranded without my name. Things I'd done because I believed I was part of the same table, things no one had cared to mention. I kept my voice low and steady. People leaned in. Then I cued the first set of images to the screen behind me. 5 years ago, I said, an outside buyer approached my father. A slide deck appeared, emails I'd pulled from an old thread I'd been copied on by mistake, a meeting agenda stamped by a hospitality conglomerate, my father's message thanking them for their term sheet. The sale didn't go through, I said. But if it had, there would be no lodge to argue over. The annual retreat would be a marketing package. That decision wasn't mine. A murmur rolled through the guests. I let the documents breathe on the screen for a few seconds, names redacted except the ones that mattered. Sterling shifted his weight and opened his mouth. I raised a finger for patience and moved on. Second, I said, and clicked play on an audio file. I didn't look toward Camden or Cyrus as their voices filled the hall. They spoke casually about transitioning rights, about how a shell company in Brian's name could simplify management of Silver Pines, how you only have to apply pressure in the right place. There was no joy in airing it, only the relief of light on something that had been growing in the dark. When the clip ended, the silence was heavier than any shout. In this house, I said, I have taken responsibility for every person under its roof. I've paid every bill out of pocket and will continue to do so through the week. No one is getting squeezed and no one will. This isn't an extraction. It's a contribution. A hand went up near the second row. Eleanor Finch stood. Her voice shook, but her words did not. 2 winters ago, after I lost half my clients, Cassian rebuilt my brand for free and introduced me to 3 people who kept my studio alive. Being here this week gave me the first commission I've had in months. Across the aisle, Troy rose next. This retreat is why I've booked a show in October, he said. Miranda added, I came to teach, not to take. I've already promised a scholarship piece to a family in town. One by one, guests stood not to flatter me, but to name the ways they had been helped by the work we were doing, by the room we made, by the energy in the air. I waited until the wave of voices eased. Then I took the envelope Celine had given me from the table, slid out a single page, and held it up. There's one more thing, I said. My grandfather's addendum. It's not the will, but it is his intention in his own hand. It says Silver Pines should be stewarded by me for as long as I'm able, because I swallowed, because I have a way of bringing people together. I set the page down on the lectern and looked at my father. His face was set so hard I could almost hear the grind of his teeth. He started toward the front, words loaded in his eyes, but I lifted the mic and shook my head. You'll have your turn, I said. Tonight isn't a trial. It's a reckoning with what's actually happened. No one spoke. The rain softened. The thunder moved farther off. I scanned the room. I know what comes next can be expensive, I said. I also know what it costs not to stand up when the moment calls. If we end up in court, so be it. But I would rather we fix this as a family and leave the lake out of it. The last sentence hung in the stillness. My father didn't answer. Brian looked down at his folder as if it had turned to stone. Around the room, guests sat with the kind of attention you don't get twice. I understood there would be paperwork later, and lawyers, and maybe headlines. But for the first time all week, the story belonged to the person actually living it. I lowered the mic. Thank you, I said. We're done for tonight. Harper opened the doors. People filed out without chatter. The storm for now had nothing left to say. Morning rose clear and bright, yesterday's weather rinsed from the sky. The lake glittered as if nothing had happened. From the balcony I could see the dock planks drying in the sun, the long drift of shadow from the pines shrinking minute by minute. Inside the house carried the hush of a church after a service. It felt like a reprieve. It felt like borrowed time. I called the family to a small room off the main hall. No guests, no audience, just the people whose names appeared on deeds and birth certificates with mine. Harper set a tray of coffee on the sideboard and left, closing the door behind her. I didn't sit. Here are the 2 paths, I said, hands flat on the table. 1, you acknowledge Silver Pines as part of our summer tradition, independent of the lodge, and not subordinate to it. I keep full authority over its programming and operations. Everyone is welcome if they come as guests, not as owners. 2, I take everything we heard and saw last night and push it to legal channels and, if necessary, to the press. I don't want to do that, but I will. My mother stared at the window. My father stared at me. Isolde cleared her throat. I want to work here, she said quietly, full time, with him. She nodded at me. I'm done pretending the lodge is the only heart this family has. This place feels like the future. The words landed like a stone in a calm pond, sending rings out to every person in the room. My father's head snapped toward her. Absolutely not, he said. We are not splitting the family in 2. It's already split, she said, not unkindly. You did that when you told him there wasn't room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't take it out, but when I glanced down, I caught a preview messages from Camden and Cyrus. I read them after the meeting, both offering a private settlement if I dropped any challenge to their attempt to control the house's rights, both dressed up in the language of concern. Even before I opened them, I recognized the pattern save face in public stifle me in private. Back in the room, my father finally spoke. We can recognize Silver Pines, he said, each word measured for now. But this family will have oversight. Financial review scheduling approval and a veto on future guests. I shook my head. No oversight. You don't vet my friends. You don't approve my work. That's the offer you get from me, and the only one. I looked at the clock on the wall. You have 48 hours to give me your answer. If I don't have it by then, I proceed as I said. My mother pressed her napkin into a tight square. And if we say no, she asked. Then we'll all learn a lot about process, I said. And the lake will outlast whatever we put it through. No one moved. The room felt small with the weight of everything we hadn't said for years. I stood, pushed my chair in, and opened the door. The corridor was flooded with light. The hum of coffee cups and soft footsteps drifted from the kitchen. The regular world was waiting on the other side of a line I had just drawn. On the porch, Harper handed me a mug, black and hot. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm steady," I said, and realized it was true. My hands were still. My breath didn't catch. The lake threw coins of light onto the undersides of the branches, and a pair of kayakers cut a silent V across the water. I didn't know what their answer would be. I did know what mine was, and it would not change. A plan began lining up in my mind with the clarity of a blueprint, formalize the governance of this place, lock in the insurance, and the calendar for the next 5 summers establish a fund to sponsor 2 artists a year from the nearest town. If my family came with me, we'd write a new chapter together. If they didn't, I'd write it anyway. I sipped the coffee. It tasted like cedar smoke and something daring. Somewhere inside the house, someone laughed. Somewhere down the hill, a door closed and opened again. The world moved forward. So did I.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.